In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Christ is in our midst. So today is the Sunday of St. John Climacus, St. John of the Ladder. And we see that ladder, and maybe you've seen it or maybe you haven't, as you exit the church. And as you look up to the left, right by the door, is the ladder of divine ascent, which is about 30 rungs. And I wanted to talk about the first 3 steps today, because many times we get to the beginning, or we think we're at a certain part and we miss the fundamentals of starting out with something. I think sometimes you can you plant a garden and not prepare the land properly, and then all that comes up is weeds. And likewise in our spiritual lives, in order to grow, we have to have the foundation laid properly for us. So I'm just going to read, the first step is on the renunciation of life. So if you read that title and you say, okay, renunciation of life, what does that mean? It's a long chapter, but one of the parts that I wanted to bring out to you is, what does it mean to renounce life? And he says here, St. John, that a friend of God is the one who lives in communion with all that is natural and free from sin, and who does not neglect to do what good he can. The self-controlled man strives with all his might amidst the trials, the snares, and the noise of the world, to be like someone who rises above them. So in order to get to this first step, we first have to be a friend of God. We have to seek all those things which are well-pleasing to God, as the prayers of the church say, and stay away from the things that are negative. St. John is very clear to speak about in the beginning phases, there's multiple sources of negativity. One of them is from our own desires. Another one is from the outside. And another one is from our families. And he speaks very clearly about the choice of families and how they play or they don't play into the life of the Christian. Now, step 2 is on detachment. So the first one is on the exile of life, and then the second is on detachment. And he says, to kind of encapsulate this, he knew how weak we could be at the start of our religious life, how easily we can turn back to the world when we associate with worldly people or happen to meet them. That is why it happened that when someone said to Christ, "Let me go and bury my father," he said, "Let the dead bury their own dead." So if we look at that quote from Christ where he says, "Let the dead bury their own dead," he's talking and is written about the living corpses, right? The people who are just going through the motions, just moving around, and Christ says, let those people bury the dead. Now you have to take the concept of detachment. So Christ is speaking about, if you're wanting to follow God, you shouldn't let anything get in your way. You shouldn't let anyone get in your way. And you shouldn't be distracted with the cares of life. In fact, in the liturgy we sing, "Let no one be distracted by the cares of life." We hear that hymn, we say the prayers for communion about focusing and about committing ourselves to God. But again, he talks about the living corpses, the people who are just concerned about doing the things that are for this world and not leaving the world to help God. You know, in the dome, many times you'll see angels. We have some angels in the dome as well, but many times you'll see angels and they'll be flying and you'll see their feet and their shoes are completely unlaced. It's because they don't take the time nor the care to worry about lacing up their sandals. And the imminent need to serve God is shown by what Christ says, "Let the dead bury their own dead." If you want to follow me, take up your cross and follow me. But don't sit back and say that you can't do it because you have things to do. And I think in our lives, we encounter those things, the things that try to take us away, so that we can do those things first, and then we can fit God in later. Whether it's activities for children, whether it's schedules that are unnecessary in our own lives. Many times we put those things first, and we become the living corpses. And many times if you ask someone who is a parent of children or young children, even to the teenage years, and you ask them, what are you doing? And they say, well, all I do is drive. All I do is drive from here to there, to there to there, and then I never have any time to do anything because all I'm doing is those things. And then I say, okay, those things are needed for the growth of the child to a point, but what are you doing to help them grow spiritually too? And many times I don't have that opportunity to tell those people that because their secular lives have overtaken their spiritual lives, and they don't encounter me, and I don't encounter them in the context of the liturgy or the life of the church. Again, St. John says on this detachment that we need to be careful, and we should be careful in case it should happen to us that while we are talking of journeying along the narrow and hard road, that we may actually be wandering onto a broad and wide highway. Unfortunately, we see that many times when people talk about fasting and they wear it on their sleeves and they say, look at me, I'm doing this, and in actuality it's this broad spectrum of putting their spiritual life on parade so that they can be congratulated in the marketplace, as the Gospels remind us. In order to walk the narrow road, we will be derided, mocked, jeered. You must accept the denial of your will. You must patiently endure opposition, suffer neglect without complaint, put up with violent arrogance. You must be ready for injustice and not to grieve when you are slandered. You must not be angered by contempt, and you must show humility when you have been condemned. Happy are those who follow this road and avoid other highways. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So we hear that it's going to be a rough ride. It's going to be a difficult road, and it's going to be a lonely road. And many times I think of, the soldiers when they're overseas and they're fighting, and what is really the most damaging for the physical safety of soldiers are the explosive devices that are on the sides of the roads, the roadside attacks, these bombs that are buried underneath the dirt when someone walks over it or drives over it, and it explodes and kills them or seriously dismembers them or injures them. And it's those hidden things that are underneath the road. And the same thing with our Christian life. Are there hidden things that are there? And there's some very overt things too. And we need to be very careful as we move forward on our path and understand that we will be attacked. If you're doing the Christian life properly, if you're living it according to the way God calls us to and according to the way the saints lay it out, it will be difficult. You will lose friends. You will lose family members. You will lose stature. You will lose the popularity contest. You will lose the ability to look at yourself and to find this extraordinary worldly pride, but you will look at yourself and say, who am I before God? What is my insignificance? And why does God love me so much? On step 3, he talks about exile. There is such thing as an exile, an irrevocable renunciation of everything in one's familiar surroundings that hinder one from attaining the ideal of holiness. Exile is a disciplined heart, unheralded wisdom, an unpublicized understanding, a hidden life, masked ideals. It is unseen meditation, the striving to be humble, a wish for poverty, a longing for what is divine. It is an outpouring of love, a denial of vainglory, and a depth of silence. This is the exile that we hear in St. John's. This is just the third step in the rung. So, it sounds, there's a lot more rungs, and there's a lot more difficulties that one would encounter. But what I wanted you to think about today in just these 3 parts, these 3 fundamental steps, is what are you doing? How are you perceiving life around you? And do you think it's impossible? Do you think it's impossible to get to step 1, to step 2, to step 3, to step 30? Or is it something that you're trying and you feel like you keep losing your step on the rung. We see that even in that icon in the back of the church, that those who are at the top rungs are still being pulled off, lassoed off by the demons, and pulled into the pit of torment. But if we look at the life on the ladder, and we say, is it possible or is it impossible? We have to look at one story that I think is very important, that I just read about recently. The story of a rock star, a Greek rock star. Now, everyone's heard of the Beatles. Everyone knows the Beatles. Everyone's heard of the Rolling Stones, right? Unless maybe some of you, I'd probably say there's probably about 1% of you here that probably have not heard of the Rolling Stones. There was a band called the Flies that came out right after the Rolling Stones, in the time of the Rolling Stones after the Beatles in Australia. That was a very popular band. And one of the individuals in that band was Greek and had a wealth of intelligence, a wealth of money, and I wanted to show you what happened to his life. He was the bassist, he was also the singer, and I could put a video on. It looks just like the Beatles with that same kind of bouncing around and the long hair and the Ed Sullivan type shows that are online, and they toured with the Rolling Stones, so it wasn't just a scrub band or a garage band. But I wanted to take a moment just to play this brief video for you. Please, if you have my phone number, please don't call me in the middle of this because I'm using my phone in order to show this.
Not to mention the other, let's call them offstage fringe benefits. Well, Maggie Palmer has a fascinating yarn about a bloke who gave up all that, as he puts it, for the love of God.
First, there was the Beatles. Then came Australia's own The Flies.
We formed Australia's first long-haired group, and we sort of exploded on the scene.
Before long, The Flies had hit records and even toured with the Rolling Stones. Not bad for a band from Melbourne. Femi Adams was living the rock and roll dream. But these days, he's known as Father Femi, and now sings to a very different tune. He left the band, studied all over the world, and eventually answered the call to become a Greek Orthodox priest.
My parents thought I'd lost it. To give up everything I own and give it to the poor didn't sound very logical at the time. But I did it, and I don't regret it, because, I've received so much more since doing that.
The contrast couldn't be more stark, but Father Femi doesn't regret the twist of fate.
Do you ever sit back and miss your life as a rock star?
No, not really. I don't. Honestly, I don't. I thank God I'm out of it, because it is superficial.
He left behind the material world for a life of poverty and chastity, and 30 years ago he headed to Africa to help. He was shocked by what he found. He couldn't ignore the war-torn country of Sierra Leone. He now lives in the small West African nation, scarred from years of conflict.
Babies, men, women, grandfathers, grandmothers, legs chopped off, arms chopped off. So right now we've got thousands and thousands and thousands of people without arms and legs, you see, trying to function.
Father Femi and his team helped them function a little better. His charity, Paradise for Kids Africa, provides education, health programs and life skills to otherwise forgotten people.
There are still many challenges because of the enormous poverty that exists there. Most of the kids in our school have never touched a computer, for example. Libraries are very rare in Sierra Leone.
The horrors, the sadness, the hardships they suffer further highlight for him just how lucky we Australians really are.
Are we a superficial bunch?
I think that's a good question, Maggie. There are two possibilities you can conclude. One, we are superficial, or rather, I would say we're apathetic, or we don't have knowledge of what is going on. The whale is stuck in the water. Hundreds of people go out to save a whale. And there are thousands of children dying on that day that whale is stuck in the water. Thousands of kids are dying of hunger. Save the whale. That's a paradox.
He worries our modern obsessions with celebrities and vanity are eating away at moral values, and he hopes we'll remember the mantra,
The haves need to worry about the have-nots. That's just a common sense responsibility.
the man who was a rock star in his day still has plenty of adoring fans, now for very different reasons.
But you weren't expecting to see that today, huh? You know, Sierra Leone is where the Ebola outbreak started. He was there before, during, and after. And one of the latest articles that he has, or interviews that he has done, said, how can I leave? Because people are saying, well, are you going to leave now that the Ebola has broken out? And he said, how can I leave when there's thousands of orphans whose parents have died from Ebola? I'm their voice and I'm their parent. If you look at the 3 steps, now, you say, are they impossible? You have someone who had wealth, had fame, and gave it all away to serve God. If you look at his life, too, he went to Brookline, Massachusetts, to the seminary there. Then he went to Harvard, Princeton, and Brown and received his PhD. But out of all that, he decided to serve God, to give his life to God. Now, that's not for everybody. And I'm not saying that you should give everything away and go to Africa to help out. But the calling that each one of us has is different, and the focus that all of us have to be on God, over anything, over fame, over praise, over anything. You know, one of the writings, too, one of the interviews said his sister, father's sister, when he was in the band, was selling his things to make money so that she could go and do fun things. So she sold his toothbrush. She would sell clothing of his to people because they knew that there was people waiting outside. So she'd come out with a toothbrush and sell it and make money so that she had money to spend. And you think about it now, and if he had an extra toothbrush, you know where it would go, to those small children. So as you think about your life, think about the people he left behind, the people that he now serves, and think about these first 3 steps of the ladder. Who are you serving? Who are you following? Who are you listening to? And how are you ready to move forward? And as you may or may not know, our missions ministry that we have will be outreaching and helping him on our next event that we have. So please support the missions ministries that we have here at the church, and know that the next round that we have of the efforts that come together as a community is going to go straight to his special ministry out there. Detachment, I think, is the key of his life thus far, and it also has to be our focus, too, on this 3rd step, this detachment from things. How are we going to step back from our lives of pulling us and yanking us in different directions, and to focus on God? Again, the steps, if you want to read about them, St. John Climacus is online. He's not online, but his work is online. So you can type in St. John of the Ladder, and there's plenty of websites that have the complete text on there. There's also this book, too, which is the Classics of Western Spirituality series that has the entire work. If you're like me, I like to have it in book form, only because I like the tangible nature of it, but you can always be non-earth friendly and print out the 279 pages or whatever it is. But I recommend that you read it, and read it slowly as you go through it, and start with step 1, see how you can make the changes in your life, then work to step 2, and so on. But remember that every time we walk out of the church, that icon is there as a reminder of that ladder to divine ascent, and who is at the top is Christ, and who is at the bottom are the demons. And if you're worried about stuttering on the ladder, just take it from the mantra of the firemen who say, as you're climbing a ladder, the worst thing you can do is look down. You have to just look forward, straight up at where you're going, but don't look down. And as you work on ascending in your spiritual life to God, just remember to never stutter, stop, and especially not to look down. Amen.